right, Algebra 1, let's go ahead and start lesson 11-1. I did get your guys' worksheet or piece of paper with your perfect squares, cubes, and fourths on it, so thank you for that. So if you notice, the very first thing when you're looking at this, we are simplifying radicals. And if you notice down the side of my board, which I would recommend that you do down the side of your paper, I wrote down all of my perfect squares. 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared, 5 squared. However you want to write it, I just put it right down the side. So I have something to work with when I'm simplifying these radicals. So we're going to start off with a very easy one. When you are trying to simplify the radical, you're looking at these perfect squares and you're seeing which one divides into it. Not the one closest to it, the one that divides into it evenly. So I'm looking at all of these and I look and see what divides into 8, or what's the highest perfect square, one of these, that divides into 8. Well, 4. 4 divides into 8. How many times? Twice. So I'm going to write this as the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. Because if I multiply those two, it gets me back to the square root of 8. Well, what is the square root of 4? 2. So I would write this as 2 root 2. That's your answer. That's simplifying that radical. And notice this root 2, you can't break it down any further. Okay? And normally what's sitting under here is usually a prime number, a number that is only multiplied by 1 in itself. So make sure you're looking for that to make sure that you have it simplified all the way down. And in order for you to be successful with simplifying these down, find the highest perfect square that divides into them. Okay, so if I'm looking at 50, what perfect square divides into 50? 4, 9, 16, 25, because nothing else divides into it. So I'm going to take this, 25 goes into 50 2 times. Well, what's the square root of 25? It's 5. So that is 5 root 2. Done. Simplified. Again, notice that's a prime number. Okay, another easy one. What perfect square goes into 27? 9. 9 divides into 27. Again, it's not the closest one to it, it's what divides into it. So I'm going to write this as the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. Well, what's the square root of 9? You're right, 3. 3 root 3. 192. What perfect square is going to divide into 192? So I go down the line of my perfect squares, and I'm trying to find the biggest perfect square that would divide into the 192. And if you're trying to figure out how to find that or how to get that so it divides into it, or which one you're trying to use, it's very simple. What you do is you just take your calculator out and you start dividing those perfect squares into it. And start big, okay? Start big with that. Okay, so what I'm looking for, what would divide into 192? 4, 9, 16. Does 16 divide into 192? Yeah. 16 goes into 192. So I'm going to write this as the square root of 16 times the square root of, how many times does 16 go into 19? 1. How many times does 16 go into 2? 3. So look at right there. There's my prime number. So what's the perfect square of 16? 4. So I would write that as 4 root 13. Done. This one here. What perfect square goes into 300? Yes, there is one, and it's usually the obvious one right here. 100 goes into 300 3 times. Square root of 100 is 10, so I would write that as 10 root 3. Now we're going to throw in some variables. And like I said, with this stuff, we're going to take baby steps because this is a more difficult concept for you guys to work with. So we're going to kind of take baby steps. So we're going to do a little bit of concepts here and there. So we're going to be spending time on 11-1 for the next few days. So I'm going to break down my 200 first. Okay, I'm going to ignore this for a minute, break down my 200. What perfect square goes into 200? 100. So I'm going to write that as the square root of 100, and it goes in twice. I'm going to leave my variable with that. Okay, I'm just going to leave my variable right there with it. What's the square root of 100? 10. So I'm going to have 10 root 2x squared. Now we're thinking square root. 2 root. Square root. 2 is the square. So there's an imaginary little 2 that sits right there in front of the radical, in front of these radicals. And again, just so I can clarify, those are radicals. We've gone over that multiple times. So there's an imaginary 2 that sits there, hence square root. So how many times does that 2 divide into that 2 for that exponent? Once, evenly. So I can pull one x out. So I would have 10x root 2, simplified. Now, if I were to put the x back in there, I'd have to take 1, because that's the exponent, times that 2. And it would take me back to x squared. Okay, let's do a few more. So again, perfect squares. I'm just going to go ahead and write them down quickly along the side here. It always helps to write these down. So then you just have them. And I usually just go to 15. So which perfect square goes into 45? 9. It goes in 5 times. And again, what did I say about that variable? Keep it with what's sitting under there is that prime number. What's the square root of 9? 3. So I'm going to write that as 3 root 5 x to the 7th. Now I'm going to do the same thing. There's that imaginary little 2 that sits there. How many times does 2 go into 7? 3 times. So I can pull out 3 x's. Well, 3 times 2 is 6, right? Because there's that imaginary 2 there. So 3 times 2 is 6. How many more x's do I need to have to get to 7? 1 more. Done. We're simplified. And notice this exponent is 1. 1 is less than 2, so that's why it's going to stay in there. Let's do this one. What perfect square goes into 90? 9. How many times? 10. Now, that is not a prime number, so this is kind of the exception. That is not a prime number, but there's no perfect squares that divide into it. Okay? What's the square root of 9? It's 3. 10x to the 5th. Well, there's that imaginary little 2 there. How many times does 2 go into 5? Twice. I can pull out 2 x's. Well, 2 times 2 is 4. How many more x's do I need to put inside? 1 more to take it back to 5. Simplified. Last one. Perfect square that goes into 20 is 4. Square root of 4, square root of 5, b to the 4th. Square root of 4 is 2. How many times does 2 go into 4? Twice, evenly. No remainder of anything left over. Simplified. So there's your first initial go at simplifying radicals. Yes, I understand this is going to be a little bit more difficult concept. Okay, but you're going to be doing a lot of simplifying radicals in the future, in a lot of your math classes. And if you don't believe me, ask any of those geometry kiddos or any of those Algebra 2 kiddos that I have this year. We simplify radicals all the time. Okay, so here's your first initial try at it. I'm not going to assign very many problems. So there it is, simplifying radicals 101.